Subscribe to True Tears Stories for more stories. Now, let's begin this one. Micah never liked barbecues, not because of the food or the people, though both often leaned lukewarm, but because of what gatherings like this turned into when the past refused to stay politely in the past. He was standing by the cooler, bottle of water in hand, half listening to someone's story about their kid's travel soccer league, when he heard her name, Danielle. The syllables hit his chest like a flick, not enough to bruise, but enough to sting. He hadn't seen her in a year, not since she walked out of his apartment with her toothbrush still in the holder and her words folded like weapons. I just need someone who's stable, Micah. Now, here she was again, her voice unmistakable, floating over the yard like a high note in a song he thought he'd forgotten. She was standing near the patio table with a small crowd around her, laughing, performing. She always had a way of turning conversations into small stages. He still drives that old Civic, she said, flipping her hair back. Bless his heart, he tries, but I just couldn't be with someone who treats ambition like a hobby. I mean, he's sweet but broke. Laughter, not cruel but complicit. Micah didn't flinch, just lowered his eyes to his water bottle and twisted the cap back on. The sound of the plastic tightening felt louder than it should have. He didn't walk away. He didn't speak up. He just stood there, quietly absorbing the blow. He hadn't seen her since she moved out. But he knew she still hung around his sister's friend group. And unfortunately, his family had a tendency to invite people out of habit instead of logic. That's how she ended up here, standing 5 feet away, dissecting him like a punchline over paper plates and ketchup bottles. He hadn't expected it to hurt. He had moved on, mostly. He'd been building something from the ground up for 2 years. A design agency with 2 full-time clients, steady freelance work, and revenue that finally tipped into 6 figures the month before. He didn't post about it, didn't talk numbers at parties. Danielle never knew, and now she never would. But the thing that settled deepest in his chest wasn't anger. It was disappointment. She still thought the story she wrote about him was true. That night, after the grill had cooled and the last cars pulled away, Micah sat in his apartment with the lights off, laptop open, spreadsheet glowing faintly. The kind of light that made you look tired no matter how well you'd slept. His inbox pinged. New client inquiry. Budget, $12,000. Timeline, flexible. Referrer, word of mouth. He stared at it for a moment, not smiling, not surprised. Just confirmed. She could mock the Civic all she wanted. He'd bought it in cash. Still ran smooth. No payments, no debt. Danielle had always admired shine, never structure. He leaned back in his chair, cracked his neck, and allowed himself a single, bitter thought. She needs them to believe that I failed. Because if Micah had quietly succeeded, then what did that make her? He opened a new tab, just curious, searched her name, found her LinkedIn, still listing the same marketing assistant job, found her Instagram, brunch shots, latte art, vacation envy. And then something else. A tweet, not recent but not old either, pinned to the top of her profile. Some days I laugh so I don't cry. 43K in student debt, and I'm just trying to breathe. Hack grad life. PUAs, help. Micah stared at it, not with judgment, not with glee, just a long, unreadable look. Then he closed the tab and poured himself a glass of water. He didn't think about it again that night, but something inside him had already shifted. A decision was forming, not fully born, but sparked. Not to prove her wrong, but to remind himself he never needed her permission to be right. The email came 2 days later. Micah had almost forgotten he'd even checked her student loan provider's site. Curiosity, mostly, or so he told himself. He'd searched her name, found the likely servicer through an old email domain she used to mention, and guessed the rest through knowledge only someone who'd lived beside her for years could know. Birth date, address history, the name of the dog she had growing up, small breadcrumbs of someone he no longer knew but had once memorized. And it worked. A balance confirmation popped up. $43,211. It was all there, itemized. Interest accrued, payment history, frozen forbearance for the last 9 months. He stared at the number again. It didn't feel big anymore. Not compared to what he was now pulling in. Not compared to the weight it once held when they used to argue about whether rent could be split 50-50 when she earned more than him. He remembered how Danielle used to sigh when she paid bills, how she'd say things like, "I'm never getting out of this hole unless something magical happens." Micah was never the magic she'd been waiting for. He looked at the tab again, then closed it. But the idea stayed. It was absurd, irresponsible, and deeply tempting. It wasn't about revenge. He didn't want her to hurt. He didn't even want her to know. But what if he made it disappear? No fanfare, no name attached. Just a silent erasure of a burden she had dragged behind her since they were 22. He asked himself why, and the honest answer was, because he could. Danielle had mocked him for being broke, while never realizing that the way he saved, quietly, without showing off, was the very thing that allowed him to move through life debt-free. She never asked about his plans, never once asked what his endgame was. She assumed because he wasn't loud about his ambition that it didn't exist, and now she owed the system more than she could see her way out of. Micah, on the other hand, owed no one. That weekend, he met with his accountant over coffee. Just a routine check-in. The agency had grown, enough to consider restructuring, enough to talk about charitable write-offs. "Anything you want to allocate personally?" his accountant asked. "Any causes you care about?" Micah stirred his coffee, quiet for a moment. "Student relief," he said finally. "Is that something we can do anonymously?" The man nodded. "Depends how you approach it. Foundations? Third-party gifting? You have options." Micah nodded too, though the options weren't what mattered. What mattered was that he'd already made up his mind. He spent the next few days working through the logistics. It wasn't difficult. His business partner didn't ask questions, just raised an eyebrow when Micah requested a large withdrawal from the discretionary fund they'd been sitting on. "Big move?" "Something like that," Micah said, keeping it vague. He wired the payment through a private service. No name, no note, just a cleared balance with a traceable stamp marked "paid in full." The loan servicer confirmed the update, and that was that. Danielle would wake up one morning and log into her portal expecting to see the same depressing balance. Instead, she'd see zero. No explanation, no credit, no audience. And he wouldn't be around to watch it land, because what mattered wasn't her reaction. It was that he'd rewritten the story she'd told about him, without ever using her name. Micah returned to his work. Scheduled meetings. Sent out invoices. The Civic still ran smooth. His apartment still overlooked the same quiet street. Nothing had changed, and yet something had. He had drawn a line. not one she could see, but one that separated who he used to be from who he'd quietly become. And then, a week later, it happened. He was scrolling through his phone during a break between client calls when he saw it. Danielle's tweet had been updated. The old one, the one about 43K in student debt, was gone. In its place, I logged in and my balance was zero. I don't know who did it, but to whoever you are, you didn't just pay off a loan. You lifted something I've been drowning under for a decade. Thank you. I'll never forget this. No emojis, no hashtags, just those words. Simple, raw, unfiltered. Micah stared at the screen, then turned it off. He didn't smile. He didn't screenshot it. He didn't text anyone. There was no need. He wasn't chasing a thank you. He was proving, if only to himself, that growth doesn't need applause. Micah didn't expect anything more after that. Danielle's tweet was simple, and it vanished into the algorithmic current like most posts do, noticed by a few friends, some mutuals from college, a handful of strangers who replied with things like faith in humanity restored and heart emojis. That should have been the end, but silence is rarely predictable. The next week, an email landed in Micah's inbox from someone he hadn't thought about in years. Joe, one of Danielle's oldest friends. They used to come over for movie nights back in the first apartment Micah and Danielle shared, bringing takeout and bottles of cheap wine that Micah always ended up paying for. Joe was sharp, observant, the kind of person who saw things even when you didn't want them seen. The email was short. Subject: You? Hey, this might be weird, but Danielle's loans just disappeared, and I remembered a few things. The way you used to take the long route to pick up groceries to avoid tolls. The way you'd tip waiters more than you could afford. The way you disappeared without ever raising your voice. I could be wrong, but I don't think I am. If it was you, just know it meant something. Joe. Micah stared at it for a long moment. The screen glowed quietly against the soft dim of his office. He didn't reply. Didn't need to. The words had already done what they needed to do. He archived the message and leaned back in his chair. He felt the weight of something he couldn't name. Not regret. Not pride. Just release. That evening, he took a walk through his neighborhood. He passed the bakery where he used to meet Danielle after her shift at the marketing firm. She'd always arrive 10 minutes late, apologizing as if he wasn't already expecting it. They used to laugh there once, before the cracks widened, before the small things, money, ambition, image, became weapons instead of conversation. Micah stopped in front of the window just for a second. The lights inside were soft and warm, a woman arranging pastries behind the counter with quiet purpose. He remembered when he thought love was that simple. Soft light, warm hands, someone showing up even if they were late. But he knew better now. Love wasn't soft, not always. Sometimes it was sharp. Sometimes it twisted inside you, leaving you trying to decipher whether the ache was from the loss or from how long you ignored the signs. Danielle had loved him, maybe, in her way, but she didn't respect him, and that had always been the fracture line. Micah crossed the street and kept walking, past the florist where he used to buy apology roses, past the dry cleaner that had once saved his only suit for a friend's wedding they both attended separately. Everything was the same, only he was different. When he got home, the apartment was quiet. He poured himself a glass of water, sat down on the couch, and opened his laptop. His inbox pinged again. This time, it was Danielle. He hadn't blocked her. He just never expected her to reach out. The subject line said nothing. Inside the message, I know it was you. I don't have proof, but I know. And I don't know how to thank you because I know I hurt you. I told people things I shouldn't have. I made jokes that weren't fair. I thought I was protecting myself, but really, I was just trying not to feel small beside you. You were never broke. I was just blind. Thank you for seeing me when I couldn't see you, and I'm sorry. D. Micah read it once. Then again, she wasn't asking for anything. Not forgiveness, not contact, just acknowledgement. Just a thread tied off where once there had only been frayed silence. He didn't respond. There was nothing to say that hadn't already been said in action. Instead, he clicked open a new browser window, typed in a URL he'd saved months ago, a non-profit microloan platform that helped young people start small businesses in under-resourced communities. He chose 3 applicants at random, paid off the rest of their balances, just like that. Because what Danielle didn't know, what no one knew, was that Micah hadn't paid off her loans for her. He'd done it for himself, to prove that the story she told wasn't the one that defined him. And now, that story was done. The next morning, he woke up earlier than usual. The air felt sharp and clean through the open window. The kind of morning that hinted at possibility without demanding anything. He brewed his coffee, sat at the table, and watched the light move across the floor. He didn't feel victorious. He felt steady, grounded in a way he hadn't felt since the days before Danielle started laughing too loud at things he cared about, before she began calling his dreams cute in front of her friends. Micah had erased a debt, and in doing so, he'd erased the last hold she had on how he saw himself. Micah didn't tell anyone what he'd done. There was no announcement, no humble brag tweet, no whispered confession over drinks. That wasn't the point. It never had been. Letting go wasn't always loud. It didn't require an audience. He stopped checking Danielle's socials, not out of bitterness, but because it no longer mattered. He didn't need to know what she did with the clean slate. Whether she used it to climb, coast, or crash wasn't his concern. He had returned what she'd taken from him in fragments: his dignity, his confidence, his silence. And now, it was his again. On a quiet Thursday afternoon, Micah found himself in a new part of the city. He was there for a client meeting, one of those newer contracts that had started to snowball after he finally stopped shrinking himself in meetings. His business had grown, almost accidentally, as if it had just been waiting for him to stop asking for permission to be taken seriously. The meeting went well, better than well, actually. He left with a signed retainer and the kind of unspoken respect that used to elude him when Danielle insisted he wasn't much of a closer. That phrase used to make him wince. Now it made him laugh. He was closing just fine, quietly, without the applause. He had some time before his train home, so he walked a few blocks until he found a small bookstore tucked between a bakery and a dentist's office. It had no signage, just a window filled with old hardcover books and a "Yes, we're open" sign swinging lazily in the breeze. Inside, it smelled like cedar and yellowed pages. A young woman with short hair and glasses looked up from the counter and smiled. Micah nodded and wandered in. He ran his hand over spines without reading the titles, just feeling the weight, the silence. Eventually, he picked a novel at random, something he'd never heard of by someone he'd never read. The title was embossed in gold, faded around the edges. He didn't care. He liked the heft of it in his hand. At the register, the woman said, "That's a good one, not flashy, but it sticks with you." He smiled. "That's all I really want these days." She tilted her head, thoughtful. "You're not from around here?" "No," he said, "but maybe I'll be back." Back on the train, he read the first few chapters. The world outside blurred past the window. Brick buildings, graffiti-covered overpasses, a flicker of blue sky between clouds. His phone buzzed twice. He didn't check it. It could have been anyone. And for once, that didn't matter. When he got home that night, he cooked himself dinner. Just pasta with olive oil and cracked pepper. He played music from an old playlist he hadn't touched since before Danielle. Not sad music, just something mellow, something his. He ate slowly, cleaned up without rushing, lit a candle even though no one would see it, not because he was lonely, but because the small rituals of care didn't need an audience. Later, he sat down with his laptop, not to work, just to write, not for clients, for himself. The words came easily now. He didn't write about Danielle. He wrote about Grace, about how sometimes letting go isn't about walking away. It's about giving without demanding to be noticed, about the power of private victories, the kind that reshape your spine more than your headlines. Micah closed the laptop just past midnight. He stood, stretched, and looked around his apartment. It wasn't much, just 2 rooms and a window with a view of a fire escape. But it was clean, quiet, unshared. No one had ever stood in this space and told him he was lucky to be tolerated. No one had laughed at his spreadsheets or rolled their eyes at his cautious budgeting. No one here belittled his generosity. No one mocked his slowness, his softness, his steadiness. Micah ran his fingers along the edge of the windowsill. The wood was chipped, but still strong. He whispered to himself, "You made it." Not to a mountaintop, not to glory, but to peace. And that was everything. The quiet that followed wasn't hollow. It was earned. Micah didn't check his bank account to feel powerful. He didn't replay Danielle's words anymore. Didn't try to prove anything in his mind. Some things just stopped echoing when they lost their audience. He hadn't gotten an apology, and he never expected one. What he got instead was his own life, finally unblurred. He started volunteering on weekends, not because it looked good, but because it reminded him of who he used to be before he started shrinking to fit someone else's version of worthy. He laughed more easily now, smiled without checking if someone else noticed. He even went on a date, just coffee, just conversation. But he didn't twist himself into someone shinier. He told the truth. About what hurt, about what healed, about the strange joy of rebuilding from the bones up. And when people asked about Danielle, rarely, but sometimes, he just said, "We don't talk anymore. It wasn't a fit." That was enough. No bitterness, no performance. Just closure you don't need to hold like a shield. The student loan company never disclosed who made the payment. Danielle never reached out, not even to guess. Maybe she assumed a family member stepped in. Maybe she suspected, but couldn't face the truth of what that meant. Micah didn't care either way, because sometimes the deepest revenge isn't a takedown. It's a gift left behind that says, "You never saw me, but I saw you, and now I'm gone. The final screenshot wasn't of numbers or balance sheets. It was of Micah smiling in soft morning light, coffee in one hand, and a caption that simply read, "You don't have to stay to win."